welcome. Thank you to those of you who are joining us here in the room and those of you who are joining us online. We are very pleased today to present the second talk in the Pamela Turbeville speaker series, Community-University Relationships, Community Perspectives on Their Interactions with the University of Arizona. Before I turn it over to our speakers, I do want to start. We always start by reading our land acknowledgement for those of us who are here at the University of Arizona. It seems it can be kind of performative, and it seems like today's talk is an especially good reminder that this should be meaningful, and that I'm going to read this, but then we really need to think about the actions that should follow to make this true. So we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. And so my name is Melissa Barnett. I'm the director of the Francis McClelland Institute. And our goal is to really work collaboratively to build community resilience so that children, youth, and families from marginalized backgrounds have the opportunity to thrive. And we do this through supporting innovative research, through actively partnering with community organizations, through sharing research findings with practitioners and the community, and through educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders. All of the work that we do is to honor the legacy of Francis McClelland, who lived a life that personified, facilitated, and celebrated resilience. She was a very generous alum and a real leader in our community. We're also happy to acknowledge the support of Pamela Turbeville, another alum of our school, who supports the speaker series as well as a lot of other things here in the Norton School Community College. And I just, if you're not already, encourage you to please follow us on social media, come to our other events where we really do strive to get research findings out there into the world. And so now the real reason you came, without further ado, we're really pleased. So as I mentioned to some of you, I heard this talk referenced at another event I was on campus, and I thought, oh, I just have to learn more about this. We collectively need to learn more about this. So I was so pleased when they accepted our invitation to come talk today. And I'm going to stop sharing so that they can pull up their slides and then go ahead and tell you about our speakers for today. So over here, Dr. Amanda Hilton is a research scientist at the Bureau of Applied Research and Anthropology at the University of Arizona. She is an applied environmental anthropologist and political ecologist who works in Sicily, Italy, in the US Southwest and Southeast. Dr. Diane Austin is a research professor and director of the School of Anthropology. An applied anthropologist, she has worked on collaborative community research for decades with partners in the greater Tucson area, the US-Mexico borderlands, tribal communities in northern Arizona and southern Utah, and the US Gulf of Mexico region. We are so pleased to have you both here today to share this report.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the introduction, and also thank you for the invitation. It is actually an honor, it is very much an honor to be with you all today, to be part of this speaker series, and also to be talking to this group, which I will let you know has a very good, strong reputation on campus and in the community for your commitment to partnerships and collaboration with community organizations. So we're thrilled to be here and share some of what we've been up to. I'd like to begin by recognizing all of the authors. Amanda Hilton, who you will hear from in the second half of this presentation, is here with us, Dr. Amanda Hilton. All the other authors are PhD candidates in anthropology, Sydney Pullen, and Dr. Elizabeth Eckert, and then myself. So the research for this study began prior to the pandemic, which I think we probably hear over and over again right now these days. And then we faced numerous delays. The release of this report this month is actually timely because the university is in conversation about relaunching the 100% engagement initiative. So I think it's a good time for us to listen to our community a little bit here. Okay.
Do you want me to do the slides?
If you would do that, then we'll do that.
Okay.
flipping, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. So as with any project and report, we did not do this alone. And so I want to take a minute to recognize from the beginning the folks who really came up with this idea and asked us to get involved. Former Associate Dean, then Associate Dean of the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Maribel Alvarez, and who requested the study, and then Jennifer Fields, who I don't know if you want to move those guys up a little bit, so
Sure.
because of the way the slides are
Is it
set.
okay if I hide that?
I just minimize it.
I think
Great, and
that's
then I'll just put
perfect,
it
and then
in
up
here.
in the top, yeah, perfect. Okay, and then maybe that bar can go to the top too, since we actually have.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe that works a little bit better. Okay. So, and then Jennifer Fields, the director of the office, the U of A's Office of Societal Impact, who also helped to support the study. And then at the beginning of the study, we had two additional researchers, Isabella Moreno and Bailey Stevenson, for the first part of the study. And they did all of those things you do at the beginning of the study, the literature review, helping design protocols, and helping do some of the initial interviews. And then, of course, we're especially grateful to the 60 individuals who took their time during a pandemic to spend time with us and help us understand their perspectives. It goes without saying, we wouldn't be here and this wouldn't be here without them. So moving on. The aim, I'll go ahead, and there we go. The aim of the project was to identify specific challenges and opportunities for university folks partnering in the community and for community people partnering with us. And to harness that information to lead to more positive outcomes for both the university and the community. And so our goal in the time we have together today is to briefly summarize the background and what it took to get the study going, what we were drawing from our preparation, but really to spend the bulk of the time talking about findings and to talk about some of the best practices and ideas that the community folks shared with us about what they'd like us to do. In some ways, what they'd like us to keep doing, and in some ways, what they'd like us to do differently. And how really to strengthen the university's capacity for meaningful and effective collaboration. So throughout the presentation today, we'll include quotes, and those come from the report. Quotes were selected because they highlight a particular example. Somebody was just very articulate in getting across the message that maybe 20 other people also said. But so that's how we use quotes, and that's how we're using them in the presentation. Okay, so, and we'll do the questions at the end. After both of us, we should have plenty of time for some discussion. Okay. All right. The study focuses on nonprofit and community organizations. When we talk about communities are complex places. And this came about through when I was asked by Associate Dean Alvarez to help guide this study, a series of meetings with Maribel Alvarez, with Sydney, and then with leaders of various community organizations, as well as some campus leaders, about what they want out of this and what approaches we should take that would be appropriate. And so through those conversations, we defined the boundaries for the study. The idea for the study actually had emerged over several years through conversations and experiences that people on campus were having and that their community partners were having. And so the goal was to talk to people and interact with people who were directly involved in these kind of partnerships. And many of whom had actually already participated in efforts to align the community and university interests over the years and to see, kind of where were we and what do we have still to do. Now, the interest in the study was also in part tied to the popularity of engaged approaches in research, which if you've been on the campus for a while, you've watched that kind of evolve over time. And so, but also that there's been increasing attention, often tied to funding, to having community partners. And so what does that actually mean? What does that mean for everybody who comes involved. And if we look at federal agencies such as the National Science Foundation, which in their the efforts they've made to kind of deepen what broader impacts are, that also ties in. So there are a lot of forces coming together. Again, I think we're speaking to the choir here, and you all know that, but that really is the impetus for how this got going. Okay. So also, interestingly, in 2020 to 2021, there were 5 initiatives going on right here on our own campus around engagement and these topics. So in other words, lots of stuff happening. But this study, the other reason this is focused on community perspectives is that there was a study already going on that was being led by Beth Meyerson of CIRO, the Southwest Institute for Research on Women, and Maribel Alvarez, focused on the university side of these partnerships. So with all of that, we were asked to come and look at the community. And then the other question was, how do we decide where? And so given the large footprint that this campus has in Tucson and Pima County, and the just interest in getting started somewhere, the agreement was made that we focus on Tucson and Pima County. All right, so, and then of course, there's further impetus for this focus, the literature review, which was drawn from course syllabi, published the reference sections in published literature, various kinds of keyword searches, etc., revealed that despite looking and I've colored these, and we lost our top color, that's okay. The top group are the journals that are pretty much disciplinary journals. And so there's literature showing up across a lot of disciplines. The middle group are journals specifically focused on higher education. And then the group in yellow actually represents now a whole suite of journals that the entire journal is dedicated to this topic. So we drew the literature from there, and we specifically were focused on articles and studies that were talking about community perspectives. But even out of that group, only 12% prioritized community perspectives in the study that was being done. Okay, so given that, we decided, yes, we will proceed. And 3 key questions guided our study design. And this was, the study was designed to consist primarily of in-person interviews with community organization leaders and individuals, again, with direct experience working with the university. Now, the idea was that these individuals would be identified through snowball sampling, both from the university side and the community side. Who's working and who else do they know? Who would they recommend? All right, so I mentioned COVID. Okay, you can see the key questions, types of relationships, impacts of those relationships on the organizations, as well as on the kinds of work they're trying to do, and then the perspectives of these folks. So, well, I mentioned COVID. We managed to have 3 in-person interviews before the university shut down all in-person research, or halted, I should say, due to the COVID pandemic. So at that time, of course, both campus and community folks were engaged in a lot of other things, trying to turn their courses online, provide their service in other modalities, et cetera. And so and of course, many of our responsibilities were rapidly expanding at that point in time. And so our research assistants took that opportunity to dig into the literature, and we adapted the protocol for virtual interviews. Okay. However, many, of course, of our potential interviews were too overwhelmed at that moment to participate in this kind of a study, and through the spring and even the summer. Others, though, found themselves stuck in front of their computers and were happy to figure out how to make time because they wanted to have that opportunity to share. So we gathered that initial set of interviews. We did some preliminary analyses, but we were very concerned about all the voices that were missing from that pool. And so we did a little work, and fortunately were able to, in spring 2021, get some additional resources from Jennifer Fields in the Office of Societal Impact. And at that time, we were also able to bring on Drs. Amanda Hilton and Dr. Elizabeth Eklund into the study. So in all, as I mentioned, we had conducted 60 interviews. They were conducted between February 2020 and October 2021, with the majority of those being between June and August of 2021. Now, 6 of those interviews were with individuals who worked at the university or with foundations, community foundations, U of A Foundation, et cetera. They provided important context, but given the focus was on the community's perspectives, we did not include those interviews in the analysis. So the analysis is based on 54 interviews. And we did a number of things to look at. You know, we can talk about community, we've narrowed to community-based and nonprofits, but that's still a huge pool of organizations that can be characterized in various ways. This slide shows 3 of the ways: the type of organization, its size, and the length of the relationship with the university. And so you'll notice that this adds up to more than 44. In those 54 interviewees worked for 44 different organizations, but some of them fit into more than one type in terms of what the organization does. So what we did with this was, after we coded all of the research, the interview data, we did analyses to look at whether these variables made a difference in the way that people were responding, and we actually found no major patterns there. In other words, you can be a small organization or a large organization, and you're experiencing the university oftentimes in similar ways. And that's what we're going to focus on today. Now, just in general, for most part, interviewees reported both positive and negative experiences, as you might expect, stemming from their relationships with the university. They had learned lessons, they had advice to offer. Even the most positive interviews usually shared some challenges, oftentimes asking to be reminded that the data would be confidential. They did not want to damage their relationships with their partnerships, and their relationships with their community, their university partners. Likewise, even those individuals who were largely negative actually wanted to establish better and stronger. They want to work with the university. So a reminder that it is likely that those folks who do not want to work with the university and then had negative experiences were probably neither referred to us nor would agree to an interview. So just a recognition that that group is obviously missing from the analysis. Okay, so as we began, oh dear.
Yeah, these is this.
Okay, can you get it so that we can see the whole thing? While they are working on that, I will say, as we began analyzing the data, one of the things we realized was that the interviewees were teaching us a lot about their experiences and the establishment and maintenance of their relationships, but they were also sharing key insights into characteristics of the university itself. And so we start out and have a section in the report that looks at exactly this: characteristics of the university that establish the context. And so I'm going to spend a little time looking at that today. And this individual, as I mentioned, we've got the quotes kind of scattered. This individual is really characterized it well. She starts out saying, I think a lot of people are just too impatient in terms of how long quality projects take. So I think the most successful thing is if you have to work with an entity like the University of Arizona, a kind of bureaucracy of that size, you have to have those 2 things in mind. What are my outcomes? How do I want to reach them? And how long am I willing to take to reach those outcomes? So, and you'll see as we go through, and Amanda will be presenting, what we pulled out of this in terms of what we were learning, what the community members wanted to teach us, was what they wanted to teach us, but they also ended up sharing what they want to teach other organizations who want to work with the university. So again, they were quite generous with their time and with their knowledge. Okay, so factors that influence the relationships that develop between community organizations and the university include things such as differences in resources, access, size, complexity. Also, the status of the university as a large state institution, and the historical and recent experiences that the individuals themselves or the communities that their organizations work with have had with the university, and we'll be discussing more of that. Key to how the partnerships form and develop are whether and how the partners acknowledge the differences, seek to address them, and then evolve as circumstances change. And so again, today we're kind of telescoping in on a few things to give you a sense of some of what they were sharing. So if we look, we've organized this section on the characteristics of the university into 3 categories. The university as a potential resource, the potential being a key word there, the university as a complex organization, and the university as an organization in constant flux. So putting your community hat on, let's look at how this university appears to folks who are trying to work with us. Okay, so if we start with the university as a potential resource, here again, people perceive it to be maybe extractive and people in the community perceive it to be destructive. And I imagine that comes from a long history of it being extractive and harmful in some cases. What I have witnessed is a lot of honest effort and from very passionate and caring people who want to work more closely with the community and to make those ties and make sure the university isn't an ivory tower, but is actually spreading its roots throughout our community and having a larger impact. So it gives us an example of the kind of reflection they were doing thinking about the university. Okay. Now, one of the challenges in terms of the university's ability to be a resource is the extent to which people in the community feel they're represented in the community. And so here's an example. I brought in some of the data that we have on comparing some of the demographics of the community with the demographics of our population. And so the data from the University of Arizona comes from UAIR, University Analytics and Institutional Research from the fall 2021 census. Data on Tucson and Pima County come from the US Census 2020. And so you can see we have disparities across many of these categories. What I want to draw your attention to right now in particular are the disparities related to faculty. And that is because faculty are often the ones who establish and maintain these partnerships and are the ones who get them going. And so their attention to and recognition and awareness of this is important. We will explore that aspect again. It will come up several times today. All right, now data, I'm going to just upfront, data on median household income for students is really hard to find. We were trying to get at some measure that we could look at. And so just to let you know what those 3 stars in the report, what that references is that these data are the combined median for students from U of A, ASU, and NAU. So already it's not perfect. And they were students born in 1991, which mean more or less the class of 2013, as published by the New York Times in 2017. Okay, so, and then the Pima County were again for 2020, just to give us a rough sense of what we're looking at on another variable. Okay, so on to the next one, the university as a complex organization. None of this is surprising to us, right? We live here, but what does that feel like again from somebody who's trying to work with us? What are they experiencing? Well, when you work with a bureaucracy of any kind, whether it be the University of Arizona or Pima Community College or the military, the bureaucracy is an entity unto itself, and it turns over in terms of personnel every few years. But because of the nature of bureaucracy, the culture grows over time and becomes very stagnant in who it is, what kind of entity it is. And so the university is like that. You could change everybody at the university And probably within 5 years, it would be exactly as it is now. Okay, so this is what they were getting at. Let's look at some more specifics of how is this relayed to us. Okay, so first of all, the university is fundamentally hierarchical. We know that. We issue those degrees. If we didn't think they meant anything, we would structure ourselves differently. And I don't mean we in this room, but as an institution. So from students, freshmen to seniors, part-time, full-time, et cetera, graduate, undergraduate, faculty, assistant professors, associate, full, part-time, full-time, career track versus, just think about how this feels. Staff and of course administrators from the program level, department level, deans, all the way up to the provost and president. The other piece is that the university is centralized in some areas and decentralized in others. And it's often hard to navigate that. We, all of us, develop strategic plans, mission statements, budgets at multiple levels, and sometimes they align and sometimes they don't. We are, of course, both land grant and research intensive. We have our main campus in Tucson with satellite campuses and offices throughout Arizona, but then actually our faculty, staff, and students are not only motivated to, but also required to work all over the world oftentimes. And so that, in terms of what relationship we develop locally, matters. And of course, we're a governmental entity tied to the state of Arizona. All right, so again, why do we do this? To think about the framework within which our community organizations are working and why, and to help us understand some of the challenges that they are expressing. Okay, so the other one is the university as an organization in constant flux. Now, this might seem on the surface a little contradictory, the person who said no matter what we do, it always comes back, but there are aspects of this at the university that, and particularly associated with personnel, that seem to change a lot. It is part of this existential struggle at the UA. And a lot of it is based on the state legislature and the trustees. They go through some president, whatever president, they go through just focused on their own internal stuff. And then a new one will come and say, or a dean or whatever, no, we really want to be out in the community. And it's almost like a breathing machine, just in and out, in and out. Okay, so the next slide gives us an idea. Again, personnel being a big piece of this, from the president, provost, deans, to whoever's running the project, whoever is the lead, or the person that's assigned to them. All of this is flux. I use this example when we think about the fluctuation in leadership, again, whether it's of the program, the college, or the university, that often entails changes in mission and focus, which this then can entail changes in expectations throughout a partnership that is enduring through some of these changes. Okay, again, I don't expect most of this is too surprising. Go ahead. All right, so what does this matter? Again, what we were looking at is how do we establish and maintain relationships in this kind of an environment amid all this kind of turmoil. And I want to make a comment here that the next section in the report, we're actually going to only devote one slide to, because I think a lot of it is and it's fairly intuitive, so that we then will move on to Amanda, who will talk about types of relationships and dig into those a little more in detail. But if we look at the broad overall, what were some of the key topics and themes? Communication, of course, comes up everywhere. I just picked two examples. Communication, first and foremost. That's what's important. But also I like the other one. Communication is 50% hearing and 50% talking. And that comes up a lot as well. But what we did was we did not actually in this section make communication a separate topic, because it literally is embedded everywhere. So we just keep bringing it up within the other topics. So this slide, goes through these 6, and we have these as sections, quotes, and examples for people to reflect on. And this goes back again, if we think about those characteristics of the university, is clarity, and clarify and provide support for community organizations seeking access to the university. Again, all of the people we talked to had already had relationships, but they reflected on what it was like to get those going. In some cases, it was serendipitous, or some were our former students. They knew people, but they all, could reflect on what that how their partnership got formed. Establish partnerships with clear expectations and ongoing assessments of how they're functioning. Remember that change over time. How is this going? Not taking for granted, oh, it worked 2 years ago, it's still working. Ground the relationships in mutual respect and ensuring that there are benefits for all. That goes without saying, it seems pretty obvious, but really understanding what is a benefit. Oftentimes, community folks will reflect that just being in partnership with the university is seen by people in the university as a benefit to the community organization. And it might be, but it might not be that direct. Pay special attention to how the community is represented in communications. And this was especially true for community groups, organizations that represent, or communities that represent groups of people who are seen in some way or another to be disadvantaged, or to have disabilities, or to have something that, and if we think all the way from the start to writing grants, how do we sell this project, how do we sell this partnership? Oftentimes the folks in the community would say, when people in this community see this communication, and when the presentations are given and the reports are shared, this doesn't feel like a collaboration to us. It still feels like they're the folks on the side saying, we've got the answers and we're coming to help you. So really reflecting on that. And then certain opportunities for mutual learning of all partners. This one's really important because often the people that they are talking about who need to learn the most are the professors, are the folks they say, we have trainings for our staff on diversity, on inclusion, on disparities, all kinds of things. And we try, when we're approached by folks from the university, to say, let's take some time and have you all go through those trainings. And often the response they get is, we're too busy. That, we need, here's the scope of what we can do and what we want to do. And so that mutual learning, yes, of the community organization, yes, of the students, but literally of everybody who's involved. Including some folks even brought up, be helpful if the deans understood this too, as these ideas trickle up. And so finally, the last one, recognizing the difference between branding and commitments, and dedicate the time, resources, and energy necessary for the latter. And this is something that, again, given the timing of this study and what it was coming on the heels of, we can understand that there were some of those many initiatives were fresh in people's mind. And really, how do we make sure that we're moving beyond just a box that people are checking because it's something that they need to do, to something that they are willing to commit? And we go back to that quote of the very first quote of the community partners who said, these take time. And recognizing that we're not going to achieve goals very quickly just by establishing. So with that, as I said, that much of that, and I am speaking to people who have a lot of experience, so I'm hoping this resonates. And I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Hilton, who is going to talk about, again, breaking this down into different types of relationships that folks have.
Thank you, Diane. So now we're pivoting to the types of community university relationships. I'm going to scoot this really cool table over here, covered in the report, and participants' thoughts about the pros and cons of each. So these are the 4 types of relationships that I'm going to talk about: internships and service learning, community as expert, grant writing and research, and volunteering. Okay, so as Diane mentioned, 44 organizations participated in the study, and we organized the organization's collaborations with university actors into the 4 types of relationships that I just mentioned. And to do this, we drew on what interviewees discussed. So this might mean that an organization was actually involved also in another category, And that isn't covered here because the representative we interviewed didn't talk about that in the interview. However, if multiple people from the same organization were interviewed and they were involved in different facets of that organization's work, that is represented in the report and in the table. And some organizations were classed into more than one category, right? So they did multiple different kinds of work. And they may have been doing both different types of work over on the left-hand column and been involved in different types of relationships and in the columns going across, so internships, etc. So we know internships and service learning are distinct, right? But in practice and in the way that they were talked about by interviewees, we put them under the same heading for the purpose of analysis and discussion. And these were a common way that organizations interacted with the university. 57% of organizations interviewed did participate in internships and service learning. And these kinds of programs provide a structure for maintaining a collaborative relationship, whether at the individual faculty level, at the level of programs of study, or even entire departments. An established and successful internship or service learning program requires frequent communication. And again, we're sort of preaching to the choir, not only to prepare and place interns, but also in the management of students and their internship or service learning experiences and outcomes, discussions of difficulties that may arise, and preparation for repeating the process, right, the next time around. And when this is done successfully, it can be of great benefit to community organizations. So this is an example. This interviewee says, the college provided credits for those students for those semester-long internships. Those internships have been very productive. The students have accomplished a lot, including policy papers that we followed up on by advocating for those policy changes. The interns have also accomplished projects, publication of a directory. Other outcomes of those internships have included the development of educational materials. So this is a very, bright shining star example of when they go well. But as we all know, they don't always go well. So participants shared both pros and cons of working with university internship programs, whether these programs involve undergraduate students who maybe don't have specializations yet, or highly specialized graduate and professional students. So some of the pros included students providing energy and labor and supporting organizations' missions, in the cases where students exemplified professionalism, and the fact that student internship programs can serve as a way for organizations to train and even recruit the next generation of employees. Cons, however, right, included difficulties in coordinating schedules between the academic calendar and the community organization's rhythms and needs, and also primarily the time, effort, and energy involved in training and managing interns, and the sometimes dubious quality or usefulness of intern projects, especially given that time that's been invested in them by the community partner. So, for example, this interviewee shared, I got my master's at the U of A. Service learning was part of that program, and I value that experience that I had. That was with a certain department. Now I'm on the other side, seeing that service learning, something needs to change in that dynamic for it to be mutually beneficial, whether we change duration or change the criteria somehow, or the population that's coming in, maybe it's just master's students, something so it's not just this onslaught of students. So again, 57% of interviewees discussed being involved in internships and service learning. And this was particularly the case for educational and cultural arts focused organizations. Internships and service learning as a type of relationship was second only in the frequency of being involved in it to grant writing and research. Okay. So the next category, community is expert. You may wonder, what exactly are we talking about? 43% of interviewees discussed being involved in what we termed community is expert type relationships. This is a type of relationship that's really a rebuttal to the idea that university actors are the ones who hold expertise or resources to impart to community organizations in a unidirectional exchange, like filling up an empty cup, right? Community is expert relationships explicitly recognize the expertise of community actors and the resources held by community organizations and community members who are outside of the university. So in this framing, the community organization is considered the expert, and the university actors are positioned to be the ones learning from them. In this approach, included community organizations being invited as guest speakers in university classes or conferences, doing curriculum development for courses, serving on a university advisory and other boards, and hosting university folks like students at their organizations. So this is one example of an interviewee who told us, I do lectures at the university. I'll get called in to do talks on subjects in multiple classrooms, colleges, departments, classes. I've partnered with another community organization. I've done talks through another college. All these connections that happen naturally, because that's one thing I appreciate, is that they acknowledge the work instead of bringing outside folks in. There are people already doing this here in town. Let's bring them in. On the other hand, this quote here illustrates not valuing community knowledge or forms of knowledge that may be read as traditional or less or not academic. So this interviewee said, also just coming in thinking that because they have a title or spent so many years being a quote unquote expert on this, they come in and just totally dismiss our traditional knowledge that we've been doing for years and years. Yeah. Like, we don't value that. That title to us means nothing. We value more life experiences. So interviewees appreciated being seen as a resource, as a source of expertise. And this approach to collaboration is important because it turns on its head the notion that the university holds all of the expertise and knowledge. Community partners hold subject matter expertise. They also hold a wealth of knowledge about the communities in which they're located and whom they serve. So one interviewee said, partners bring unique knowledge and networks, relationships. Those community stakeholders often have the trust of the community, and that's something that they can bring and add value to the collaborations. Community organizations often spend years developing these relationships of trust with the communities they serve, and they may be hesitant to risk this goodwill on a collaboration with the university, especially if they don't already have an established relationship of trust with that university actor. And whatever the nature of the expertise, university actors need to think about and navigate if, how, and when to monetarily compensate community organization actors for the time and expertise that they share with the university community. So on to the next type of relationship, grant writing and research. These kinds of relationships really run the gamut in terms of university actors involved. We have departments, we have schools, colleges, we have this at the level of individual faculty. Graduate students also, there's a subsection of the report entirely about graduate and professional students that we didn't quite have time to dive into today, but if you're interested in that, that's there. It also run the gamut in terms of the nonprofit partners involved and the levels of involvement of the different parties in these grants and research initiatives. So given the importance of grants to academic research and the fact that we're in an R1 research intensive university, 66% of interviewees spoke of their experiences collaborating with U of A actors in this category. So this was the most frequently mentioned type of relationship. And interviewees shared many types of roles they had played, from co-writing grants as a partner from the very beginning to learning that they had been included on a grant at the very end after the grant had been funded, right? And an example of a positive experience of research was shared by this interviewee, who shared, but I have to say it's also successful in that it's funded by the National Science Foundation. Oh, I think the relationship with the university has strongly influenced our scientific legitimacy. The access to funding from especially federal agencies, I think having university partners has been extremely important. But a key takeaway from these conversations about grant and research was that community organizations prefer to be consulted from the start if they're going to be involved in grants, rather than being contacted after the project and research design are already conceptualized or added on after a grant has been written in its entirety and in some cases funded. Was there one behind that? Yeah, this one.
Sorry.
So, no, that's okay. So in this example, we have, in the beginning part of the quotation, the interviewee is talking about a good example that they were currently experiencing. So I think early collaboration is really great. Both organizations were involved in helping to create the content of the grant and the vision, and just from the very beginning, or at least earlier on, right? So this person was really excited about this because at the very end because another example is we found out that a grant was awarded that we were written in for broader impacts on yesterday, is that last line. So, from the beginning, if even earlier on than the beginning, if that's possible. Okay. So budgeting resources is a primary way that power is exercised in management of grant or research projects. And community actors spoke also to the discomfort involved in asking to see grant budgets. And in the case of being participants in research, asking to be compensated for their time. Grants and research are major and important ways that community organizations interact with folks here at the University of Arizona, and they vary widely in terms of the scope, the amount of funding involved, and the amount of time necessary both to write the grant, revise the grant, and carry out the research responsibilities, including dissemination of findings. So the themes of mutual benefit and involving community organizations from the outset in developing the research were echoed by multiple interviewees across these different types of research projects. Volunteering is the last type of relationship that we're talking about today, and that's in the report. And university actors volunteer with community organizations or vice versa, clearly in a variety of ways, but the focus here is on university actors volunteering with or for community organizations. And this is what came up most often in the interviews. So 43% of the community organizations, the representatives that we spoke with, discussed having volunteer relationships with the U of A. And these really ranged. They range from students providing unskilled labor to perform community service, like maybe picking up trash, to university actors with very specialized expertise, offering specialized clinics to address particular community needs, to university actors serving on community organization boards. And in the case of students, these are distinct from internships because while students may learn something from the experience, they're not explicitly tied to a course or to degree requirements. Or sought out primarily for their learning potential. And these volunteer relationships can go very well. So in this case, this interviewee shared, I think the most successful interactions with the university are ones where we have retention across years, since there's so much change over time with the student populations. Diane mentioned this theme in the first half. More of a like set thing, like this club always works with us for tutoring or something like that. Those have been a lot of the really positive experiences that we've had with the university. In other cases, student volunteers don't necessarily represent a positive contribution for community organizations, as I'm sure we can all imagine. This interviewee shared, I've worked with students, I run the education department, so I work with different fraternities and sororities or department who want to come and do service. It's easy to reach out and say you want to do service, but oftentimes groups aren't flexible with their service, or they're too short-sighted to actually schedule things. An issue that came up more recently was that we implemented a fee for groups who want to do service here. And then I bolded this part, right? Having a service group here is often more about the service group than service. We can work with inmates who do the kind of things that service groups want to do. We're also limited in the amount of, I'm not sure what the last line says. I think it says the amount of space. That's what it says. I know that's what it says. The amount of space that we have. You know, if we have a really large group reaching out saying they want to place 40 students next week, you know, that's not really possible. Okay. So volunteering, like all the other types of community university relationships, require time and effort of both partners. And there's considerable variation in the utilities of volunteer and volunteer service for community organizations, especially because of the knowledge needed to perform whatever the task is and the time necessary to organize and supervise volunteers versus the time that volunteers spend doing the actual service. University programs that volunteer time to serve specific community populations exemplify how university expertise can be applied effectively in the broader community. And the value of students and student groups volunteering for infrequent short periods varies depending on the needs and capacities of the community organizations, because there were some organizations, I want to say, who were really enthusiastic about these like sort of one-off, really large student groups that come and do 3 hours of picking up trash, right? This was also sometimes seen as a positive. It just depended. Okay. So pivoting from the types of relationships to best practices and things to avoid. When they asked about what they found helpful and positive in their interactions with university actors and things that should be avoided, interviewees had a lot to say. The corpus of interviews included more than 200 individual cases where interviewees spoke of things the university does well and should continue, or things that have gone poorly and should not be repeated. And despite the particularities associated with each type of community-university relationship, several themes emerged across the different types of relationships. And some of these have already come up. Diane sort of foregrounded many of them. And I'm going to discuss the ones I'm going to discuss are time, communication, university resources, and bridging the gap between university and community. I also want to note that we did ask interviewees what their advice would be for a community organization that wanted to begin a relationship with the university, as well as what their advice would be for a professor who wanted to begin a relationship with a community organization. But we're focusing on their advice for university actors just because of the audience today. So the length of time or staying power of a community university partnership was discussed by this interviewee who said, I think staying power is a success, and I'm talking like 10 years. That if you can maintain a good relationship with somebody where they still want you around 10 years from now, or you're still engaged in a meaningful relationship after 10 years, that I think is success. Time is a significant factor, challenging successful community university engagement for multiple reasons. Universities and community organizations run on different calendars. Which we've already mentioned, both groups are constrained by calendars associated with grants and funding cycles. And while one-time engagements can serve the needs of some community organizations and university actors, like these cases of student groups providing, a few hours of service, university actors can avoid these sort of exploitative one-sided relationships by contacting community organizations well in advance, confirming the needs and capacities of the organizations, and maintaining the communication through the end of the interactions and afterward. So communication was frequently discussed as fundamentally important to successful collaborations and partnerships. This is an example of a not so good communication. It also re-raises the issue of bureaucracy that came up earlier. There's also been communication issues, says this interviewee. There's difficulty working with the U of A because there's always the sense of ego. Like, we're the experts, you have to do what we do, and if you don't, then this partnership doesn't work. Interviewees spoke of the importance of this sort of clear, frequent, honest communication, right? Several highlighted communication as necessary, a necessary prerequisite for any kind of functional relationship, discussing the value they see in university actors' willingness to listen, to be flexible and responsive to what they hear, and to be clear about their own goals and desires in the collaboration. So communication is clearly a very broad term, and it can refer both the logistical aspects of regularly checking in, keeping in touch, opening up lines of communication, and it can also refer to the content and attitudes of those communications. And all of these really require care for successful navigation of partnerships and collaborations. So interviewees from several types of organizations spoke to feeling frustrated with how to reach university resources, describing the university as massive and difficult to navigate. Interviewees who identified as Native, African-American, and Hispanic or Latinx spoke to behaviors and structures at the university that work against Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, as well as people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, to feeling welcomed, comfortable, or like they belong on campus. So for example, this interviewee shared, one time we took a group of students over to the university for a campus tour. I thought this university has as a responsibility as a land grant institution to be able to serve those students from this particular tribe. And so when we got there, it was very interesting because the students weren't as welcomed as they should have been. And the whole experience was very off-putting. Interviewees also cited the importance of university resources becoming available to the wider community as an important aspect of strong relationships. These resources were conceptualized differently depending on the work that the community organization did and the nature of their interactions with the university. So they included the university's physical space and equipment, the campus, the buildings, rooms in which to meet, access to parking, right? Library privileges, as well as intangible resources like the specialized expertise and knowledge held by faculty, staff, and students. Right, so this is an example of the interviewee talking about these different types of resources. They shared, and so sharing the resources, that could look like a lot of things. It could be funding, like grants, but could also be these different opportunities that the UA has, like access to spaces to meet on campus. To print, like printing flyers, that's a big thing. Most of our work is printing flyers to get the word out. Sharing resources like that, volunteers, interns, but still having our autonomy, where we didn't have to shift completely to make the goals of whatever department that it is, shifting what we were envisioning. So closely related to sharing resources is this idea of bridging the gap and linking community members to the university, often in the form of university students, but also including faculty or staff. More than a dozen community organizations who serve populations who have little access to the university, especially children, identified this as an important benefit. So this interviewee shared, we're working in low-income sites here in Tucson where the trajectory for a lot of those kids historically is not to the university. So I feel like there's a real value in bringing young university students to those locations and building relationships with those students where they can. Now we see more representation, and I feel like that makes that piece even better, where kids get to start seeing people that look like them and come from places like they do, that have this identity as a university student. That has a lot of value. So sort of wrapping up here, fundamental to successful community-university relationships, regardless of the type or nature of those relationships, is the need for complementary missions and to share and operationalize values. Many interviewees felt that the University of Arizona does not share their organization's mission, or that despite what's written in documents or put onto websites, it's not clear what the university's mission really is. And that goes also for units smaller than the university, so departments, individuals, et cetera. And without such clarity and lacking an overarching structure that helps unify how many individual partnerships that exist across campus, unify the many individual partnerships that exist across campus, each university actor really brings their own understanding and approach. So potential collaborators sort of struggle to figure out what each partner brings to the table. And a large diverse institution like the University of Arizona faces really significant challenges in developing and sustaining a structure that would be sufficiently broad and stable to unify these various community-university interactions, which with different university actors are involved, while at the same time not constraining or limiting partnerships that might emerge in the future. University leaders establishing such a structure must be very well versed both in the myriad and often abstract understandings of community engagement, but also intimately familiar with and knowledgeable about the communities that the university serves. So there are already lots of good examples on this campus of units, programs, and individuals that do engagement really well. Good examples are found right here, right? And for programs that already follow best practices like the ones that are presented in this report, it's really fundamentally important to continue to be leaders on campus around these issues. Okay. So we want to thank you all for the invitation to share this research, all of you for your time, both the Zoom folks, I guess I should look at that panopticon camera, and the folks who came in person. You're all experts on community engagement, and we welcome your comments or questions, so please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our contact information is there. The report is publicly available at that link, so please check it out if you think you might be interested in it. If your community partners might be interested in it, please don't hesitate to share it widely. We also want to mention that there will be a webinar on March 13th at 12 p.m. to present the report to a general audience, both community members and university folks. It will be shorter than this. So if your community partners might be interested, please let them know, let us know, and we can send you the link, the specific link. And finally, maybe the best way that we can thank the people in the community who shared their experiences with us is to really listen and try to implement some of their ideas about best practices. So thank you so much.
Well, let's think about any questions there.
Do you have any insights you could share with the group about the types of, like, generally speaking, the colleges and the departments? Because it was nonprofits and community-based organizations, so I feel like there's a certain type of departments across campus who would be more engaged with those, and so that's interesting that those I would have presumed to be more aware and maybe doing things better, but not always. So I'm just any insights to who the U of A.
Yeah, so you were asking, like, did we do analysis by what college the folks were working with, et cetera?
Yeah.
We started to look at doing that. A couple of things. One, we did not, because of the design, we didn't look to have a equal spread across colleges.
Right,
So
right.
it was going to be biased from the beginning. But the other is that a lot of the organizations actually work with multiple colleges. And so I think in reading through some of the interviews, it's surprising to see how many connections
Yeah.
some of these organizations have on campus. There are definitely those organizations who have learned how to really access the various types of groups. But when we think about in terms of the colleges, we might say, oh, well, it would be CALS, for example, or it would be SBS, or it would be
Right.
humanities, or,
Right.
well, the math department puts out a lot of tutors into the community. And so when you start looking down, you realize, and based on the criteria for what a partnership might be, for some folks, it's that, providing somebody who's a regular speaker at, your events. And so it turned out to be, because of the way we set this up, we really couldn't answer you. And we found, I would say that it wasn't like it was so obvious in the data, like consistently, oh boy, every time we got a negative, it's because they're working with this college.
Yeah, no,
And some of the folks who you think would know better
Right.
were actually the colleges that,
Right.
or departments within those that they had community partners who were struggling with at least certain aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add that I think it was really remarkable, even though this isn't a huge sample size in terms of the community organizations and the number of interviewees, the diversity of involvement that they had really across the campus and across the colleges. I learned about all kinds of initiatives that I had never heard about in a decade of being on this campus. So the reach, sort of like the tentacles of the university, are pretty impressive. Yeah.
You mentioned like the point of contact when you broke down like the demographics of community members and campus. You had like undergrad, grad, and faculty. And you mentioned like point of contact for community members is most often faculty. Very myopic view, but my experience, it has been staff members that have been working with community members. So I'm just wondering if that is part of your report, or if that's something that you could share about.
Yeah, no, like if there's just, if staff members were a category and it was analyzed, if
Yeah.
people spoke about staff, the
Or
short
in the
answer
demographics at all.
is no, because the majority of the time, right, there's also this sort of issue of how the community organization is understanding the people inside the university and how they're positioned, and whether they really know whether that person is staff, faculty, the type of faculty, et cetera. So I'm just trying to think of, I think a lot of the times, it was sort of similar to the reason that we put internships and service learning under the same heading. At first we tried to separate them out, but then when you look at individual interviews, it's like, wait, from what the interviewee said, we're really not sure. So no, it's not broken down by staff. But are you asking also about in that slide about like income, if that's included for staff?
Yeah, because you brought it up in the context of like representation, like
Yeah.
do people see themselves represented? And I would
Ah,
guess that representation model shifts quite dramatically when we're including staff.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
an excellent point. And Amanda's right. We would even have the data to look at that, but that's really important as we think about how often, in the same way they would gloss and call all kinds of things internships that we wouldn't call internships, were they calling people professors who actually weren't professors? If we think about even our undergraduates who call their TAs professors, how much they recognize these different categories. So that's important. That's important for us in thinking about how we present this, that we make it clear that may actually, the staff faculty categories probably conflated.
Another question. So you're talking about the organizations in the beginning, you're talking about the size, that it had similar types of themes come up. Is there any data about like who initiated the relationship, if it was from them to us or us to them, if that made a difference in any of this?
We do have that, and the short answer is, again, well, to be honest, I'm not sure if that was specifically analyzed. One of the questions we asked in the interview was, how did the relationship begin?
Yeah.
So we know, what the sort of narrative is about oh, we've been working with the university for 30 years and it was Dr. So-and-so and they had this research interest in this and they set this all going. Or, it might have been, I'm trying to think of specific examples where many times when interviewees were talking about trying to reach the university, it was this sort of like impermeable, impossible. They were basically saying it has to be initiated in the other direction because we don't even know where to begin, including folks who've run internship programs in the past saying, what do I go on campus and post my flyer? I don't even know where to post it, much less the listservs and the campuses. And sometimes I send an email to the person who's listed in it as administrative, staff in whatever department, and I never hear back from them, et cetera. So I think we do have the data. I don't have a good answer right now about, the frequency for which side initiated the relationship, but oftentimes it is initiated by the university actors in these sorts of narratives.
Having been one who was looking at that to see what could we learn from this, the other challenge was because oftentimes we realized it wasn't clear. The person could tell you how they got involved with the university, but they couldn't necessarily tell you about, some could, it was like the community organization lore of 30 years ago, it was this and that, but others were like, well, I know I do, and so does, and so does, but, and then it was like, so what do we count? Do we go to the organization level? Do we go to the individual level? And so it ended up being, we're just confess our data's a mess on that. So we don't have a clear way, but it's the kind of thing. What I think, like every good study, this raises as many questions. You go, oh my gosh. And part of the interest, and I think the interest on campus right now is, as the university goes for the Carnegie classification, you actually have to have in place monitoring. So the question is, can you take something and develop it into something more than a Qualtrics survey, that actually helps us and allows us to ask some of these questions and add new questions and keep exploring these relationships. So I guess that's my hope of one of the things comes out of this, because we got into it, and the more you read, it's the kind of thing that you wish you could just make all of the interviews and the pages and pages of wisdom that were coming back at us available. Oh, you bet. Okay. International communication. We're in Nogales, Sonora. Is that what I'm reading?
Yes.
Hi, Alma. And we met Diane many, many years ago. Alma, hello. We actually had quite a conversation about, do we include even Santa Cruz County, Nogales, Arizona, Nogales, Sonora. And for this particular study, again, there were individuals who had worked in Nogales or worked in Cochise County, et cetera, but they were included if they also had partnerships and work here in Tucson. So in that case, we had kind of some insights from folks who had also worked in Nogales, but we weren't focused on going and finding folks who had worked in Nogales. Okay. And then another one, thank you for your presentation. Was the community-based work of UA Cooperative Extension included in the study? If so, how?
Well, that's a bit of a confidentiality issue. I'm sure you're all wondering, was I included in this? What did they say about my project? What did they say about my school or my department? And I can't tell you that. But I can tell you that many of the units that we know, that we think of, doing this type of outreach and engagement are included, as are, like, the first question, or whichever question it was, units and departments and colleges and schools that we don't necessarily think of as being, doing a lot of engagement and outreach. So, yeah.
So I will say the answer to that is, were they eligible for inclusion? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if they came in via either university or community, and we were able to contact somebody in, again, the context of a pandemic and everything else, then certainly they could be involved.
we certainly didn't focus on any particular school or, you know, because again, the sampling approach was this purpose of snowball sampling. So it was more the community actors that were referring us to somebody else in the community than if we'd done that on the university side. So, and there is that other university report, the focus on the university side, so. Or study, I'm not sure what the findings are. Any questions?
Wow.
Last call. It's like from turn it up.
No more questions online.
No, that's-
Well, thank you again. Thank you so much. And really
And thank you all, and thank you for your interest and for being leaders on campus. We are serious. This is the time when the leaders need to be actively involved in the conversations.